American manufacturers come alive across the heartland, and the future will be made in America. No matter what the white supremacists and the extremists say, I made a bet on you, the American people, and that bet is paying off.
Wow. I honestly had no idea that white supremacists and extremists were against making things in America. Learn something new every day, I guess. This is Emperor Biden. On Thursday, September 1st, 2022, Biden gave a speech titled "The Continued Battle for the Soul of a Nation." Here are some highlights.
My fellow Americans, I speak to you tonight from sacred ground in America. We the people, we the people, we the people, we the people, and we the people must say, we the people, we the people, we the people.
Anyway, before I get into the analysis of his remarks, it's helpful to know how we got here. So let's go back into history a little bit. In an NBC News poll released on August 21st, 1,000 registered voters were asked, what is the most important issue facing the country? Participants were offered a randomized list of choices and were asked to pick two. 21% of respondents chose threats to democracy as their first choice. So what are threats to democracy? Who knows? It's an incredibly broad choice and could be referring to anything. Does it have to do with voting rights? Could it refer to Biden using the Justice Department to raid a political opponent's home? Or maybe someone is worried about an attack on our homeland by international terrorists. Who knows? And you know what might be helpful? A breakdown by political identity. Yes, we know how many Republicans, Democrats, and Independents took part in the poll, but unlike other polls out there, we don't know how they responded to each question. In other words, we don't know how many Democrats, Republicans, or Independents chose threats to democracy as their first choice. Not that we know what threats to democracy means anyway. So a couple days later, on August 26th, Joe Biden gave a speech at a private residence in Bethesda, Maryland. There's no audio or video, but we do have the official White House transcript. And during his speech, he brought up the NBC News poll. For the first time, you have 50% of the American people. 50% of the American people say their greatest concern. Over 50, I think it's 51% in the latest polls. Concerned about whether or not democracy can be sustained. First of all, it was 21%, not 51%. Second, where is he getting the specific that the poll choice was about whether or not democracy can be sustained? You know, democracy doesn't work very well unless you can reach a consensus. And you can't reach consensus unless you have some unity. And what we're seeing now is either the beginning or the death knell of an extreme MAGA philosophy. So according to Joe Biden, the extreme Make America Great Again philosophy is either just starting or it's on its deathbed. Makes sense to me. What's your problem? But then Joe Biden made one of the most politically divisive statements ever made by a sitting president. It's not just Trump. It's the entire philosophy that underpins I'm going to say something. It's almost like semi-fascism in the way that it deals. Oh, the extreme MAGA philosophy is semi-fascism. Sorry, almost like semi-fascism. And what the hell is semi-fascism? Is that like being semi-pregnant?
What do you mean by semi-fascism, sir?
So in December, you will...
You know what I mean.
Gee, thanks for clearing that up, Brandon. Now, you might think that it's hyperbole to say that Joe Biden is calling most Republicans fascists, semi-fascist, whatever. But let's take a look at Joe Biden's remarks on August 26th in Rockville, Maryland.
Well, here's the deal. Here's the deal. What's happened is there are not many real Republicans anymore.
There aren't many real Republicans anymore, which means that the majority of Republican voters are MAGA Republicans, i.e. semi-fascists. Now, to Joe Biden, a real Republican is someone like Senator Rob Portman or Senator John Cornyn. These two senators recently had no problem voting on legislation that chips away at your gun rights, or a needless $52 billion corporate giveaway to beg computer chip makers to build manufacturing plants here in the US, a thing that they should be doing anyway. And by voting yes, Portman and Cornyn helped to give Joe Biden 2 legislative wins. And in return, Joe Biden called the majority of Republican voters semi-fascist. Great job, idiots.
There are not many real Republicans anymore. I respect conservative Republicans. I don't respect these MAGA Republicans.
So to make this very clear, Joe Biden is saying that most Republicans are MAGA Republicans because there aren't many real Republicans anymore.
Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans. MAGA Republicans. MAGA Republicans. So how extreme are these MAGA Republicans? If the MAGA Republicans win control of the Congress, it won't matter where you live. These MAGA Republicans won't stop there.
So Biden is trying to use the term MAGA as a slur against Republicans who disagree with him.
The MAGA Republicans are destroying America.
Woo! They're destroying America!
The MAGA Republicans don't just threaten our personal rights and economic security. They're a threat to our very democracy.
What's next, Joe? Rounding up the MAGAs and sending them off to camp? I bet he's thought about it, though. Now, Joe Biden doesn't care about offending Republicans with his rhetoric because he's speaking directly to Democrats in an attempt to rile them up and hopefully increase their turnout in the midterms.
In 2020, you and 81 million Americans voted to save our democracy. And it's not hyperbole. Now you need to vote to literally save democracy again. Look.
In other words, vote Democrat or democracy dies. Now, he's making this call to action because Biden and Democrat leadership know that they're absolutely going to get shellacked in the midterms, and they are desperate. But getting voters to listen to him is going to be a hard sell. In the latest Reuters Ipsos poll, Joe Biden's approval rating among registered voters is 38%. And while Biden has some legislative wins under his belt, they're overshadowed by very high gas prices, inflation near 40-year record highs after promising inflation was transitory, 2 negative quarters of GDP, which means we're now in a recession, the majority of Americans having to now pay off up to $1 trillion in student debt for a minority of Americans, a fentanyl crisis, and more illegal border crossings than ever before in our nation's history. Wow, thanks, Brandon. And since Biden obviously can't run in his record failures, yelling about Republicans and begging Americans to vote for Democrats is really his only option.
We just have to vote. Vote.
And it's not just Biden demonizing Republicans, it's members of his administration, including White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
When you ask me about the MAGA agenda, especially as it relates to Congress, as it relates to elected officials, it is one of the most extreme agendas that we have seen. And it is a part of the, it is the extreme part of the Republican Party.
So Karine is trying to say that the people who want to make America great again are the ones with the extreme agenda. Sure, okay.
And again, we see majority of Americans who disagree. And so when you are not with where majority of Americans are, then, that is extreme. That is an extreme way of thinking.
So let me get this straight. If you disagree with the majority, it's not only an extreme way of thinking, but also you're extreme. So let's see how extreme Republicans are compared to the Democrats, shall we? According to the Washington Post, about 3 in 10 Americans say that biological boys and men should be able to compete in sports against women and girls. By Karine Jean-Pierre's definition, I think it's safe to say that when 3 out of 10 people disagree with the majority, they're extremists. According to this Monmouth poll, 80% of Americans support requiring voters to show photo identification in order to cast a ballot. 18% oppose this. And despite that polling, 220 Democrats in the House passed H.R. 1, which would allow people to obtain a ballot without showing voter ID. That doesn't exactly sound like the will of the people, does it? According to this Associated Press poll, most Americans think that unpregnanting yourself in the second and third trimester should be illegal or illegal in most cases. And despite the majority of Americans' wishes, Democrats in the House passed a bill that would allow any woman under any circumstance to unpregnant herself up until the moment of birth, which goes against the will of 80% of Americans. And of course, the majority of Americans, 58%, disapprove of Joe Biden. So, by Karine Jean-Pierre's definition, if you think that Joe Biden's doing a good job, you're not with the majority. You're extreme. But great job, Karine. You're doing God's work. Now, you may remember that when Joe Biden was elected, he made a promise to turn down the temperature and unify the country.
We can see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors. We can treat each other with dignity and respect. We can join forces, stop the shouting, and lower the temperature. For without unity, there is no peace, only bitterness and fury. And unity is the path forward. Unity, unity, unity.
And yet, in the last 19 months, Joe Biden and his handlers decided that unity was never really high on their priority list. Instead, they came to the conclusion to hold a primetime speech titled "The Continued Battle for the Soul of the Nation." But the question was, would Biden continue to go full ham on Republicans, or would he dial it back, for unity's sake?
Do you think the president will make a distinction between what he considers the MAGA philosophy and rank-and-file Republicans?
Yes, and because he's been beat up over those remarks, which he said in private that wasn't meant for a public forum, I think he'll soften that language a bit.
So according to Eva McKend, when Biden called the majority of Republicans semi-fascist, he said it in private to a bunch of Democrat donors. It wasn't meant to be public. America wasn't supposed to hear that. But yes, Joe Biden did in fact try to walk back the rhetoric.
I want to be very clear up front. Not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans are MAGA Republicans.
Oh, really?
There are not many real Republicans anymore.
Wow, Joe Biden contradicting himself? I know you're shocked.
There are not many real Republicans anymore.
So Biden decided to give his speech at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And as you can see, it was draped in bright white light. But when Biden appeared, the lighting dramatically changed, making it look like some kind of blood red hellscape. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this image of Biden shouting with his fists in the air, along with lighting making the birthplace of our nation look demonic, and a placement of 2 Marines standing in the background, well, it doesn't exactly convey unity. Ironically, it screams fascism. And of course, Democrats on Twitter came to Biden's defense by screaming, "But Trump has red backgrounds." However, none of these backdrops make it look like Trump is giving a speech from the pit of ultimate darkness. And some were quick to point out that Independence Hall was lit in red, white, and blue. An actual photo of Independence Hall during Biden's speech last night. As if this wasn't an actual photo. Not that anyone actually cares. But President Biden just spoke in front of a red and blue background. The internet is currently freaking out over poorly or deceptively cropped photos. However, if you tuned in to watch the speech live, and why would you, you'd be wondering where all of that white and blue is. But sure, it's the mainstream media that's trying to make Joe Biden look bad by deceptively cropping. Got it. And speaking of the backdrop, Biden was criticized for the placement of the 2 Marines standing behind him during the entire speech, and many accused him of using military personnel as props.
If you could address the criticisms and the questions about why the president delivered what sounded very much like a politically charged speech as an official White House event, taxpayer funded, with 2 Marines in uniform in particular flanking him and visible on camera.
Look, the president gave an important speech last night, a critical speech, and an added inflection point. The presence of the Marines at the speech was intended to demonstrate the deep and abiding respect the president has for these service members.
In other words, yeah, the Marines were used as props. So it wasn't just the blood red background and the improper use of the military, it was the content of the speech, which was primarily spent saying MAGA Republicans over and over again.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans. MAGA Republicans. Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans. MAGA Republicans have made their choice. MAGA Republicans. MAGA Republicans. MAGA Republicans. MAGA forces are determined to take this country backwards. And MAGA Republicans are to destroying American democracy.
So inspiring, huh, America? And then Biden said the word democracy so many times that by the end of his speech, the word lost all meaning.
American democracy only works in a democracy. Democracy itself, the assault on American democracy. And MAGA Republicans are to destroying American democracy. Threat to American democracy is real. Democracy. American democracy is guaranteed. Democracy. Defending our democracy is fatal to democracy. That will secure our democracy.
I love democracy.
Democracy. Our democracy isn't perfect. This is a democracy. It always has been our democracy. We preserve democracy. Democracy and that democracy. Democracy to saving American democracy. 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 A democracy is not normal. God bless you all. Democracy.
Then there was the unknown heckler standing outside of the speech, playing a siren on a megaphone and chanting, "F Joe Biden."
I give you my word as a Biden, I've never been more optimistic about America's future. Not because of me, but because of who you are. America's often made the greatest progress coming out of some of our darkest moments, like you're hearing that bullhorn.
So a man protesting Biden during his so-called democracy speech is one of America's darkest moments. You have the Civil War, the attack on Pearl Harbor, Megaphone Man. Got it.
MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution.
When Biden says that MAGA Republicans don't respect the Constitution, he's projecting.
No amendment to the Constitution is absolute. This is a nation that honors our Constitution. We do not reject it. And no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Okay, this drives me nuts, and I've always wanted to address it. First of all, you're allowed to yell fire in a crowded theater, especially, if there's a fire. So saying that you're not allowed to makes no sense. And for clarity, here's the actual quote from Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. The most stringent protection of free speech would not protect a man falsely shouting fire in a theater and causing a panic. Notice that Joe Biden omitted the word falsely and added the word crowded. In other words, don't trust anyone who claims that you can't yell fire in a theater. Anyway, moving on.
There's no amendment that's absolute. When the amendment was passed, it didn't say anybody can own a gun and any kind of gun and any kind of weapon. You couldn't buy a cannon, and when this amendment was passed.
Biden's claim about the Second Amendment and not being able to buy cannons has been fact-checked, debunked, and rated false numerous times over the years. But that hasn't stopped Joe Biden from saying it over and over again anyway.
But from the very beginning, the Second Amendment didn't say you can own any gun you want, as big as you want. You couldn't buy a cannon when, in fact, the Second Amendment passed.
You see, Joe Biden loves the Constitution, except for the amendments that get in the way of his agenda.
Democracy cannot survive when one side believes there are only two outcomes to an election. Either they win or they were cheated. And that's where the MAGA Republicans are today. This is a nation that respects free and fair elections. We honor the will of the people. We do not deny it.
Oh, really?
He won the election by 70,000 votes in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. He won it because he had help by the Russians.
So this woman claims, without any evidence, that Donald Trump won 3 different state elections because of help from the Russians. And instead of telling that woman that she should honor the will of the American people and not deny the election, Biden's like,
He's illegitimate. And my biggest fear is that he's going to do it again with the help of Vlad, his best pal, and we're going to be stuck for 6 more years with this guy. And that is terrifying. It's terrifying.
Would you be my vice presidential candidate? Folks, look, I absolutely agree.
Denying the outcome of the election? Joe Biden must be one of those MAGAs we've been hearing about.
Either they win or they were cheated.
And Joe Biden agreeing with that woman makes sense. Because remember, Democrats said that the 2000 election was stolen, including Joe Biden. They said that the 2004 election was stolen, and they said that the 2016 election was stolen. But when Republicans do it, suddenly it's the big lie. And I'd like to remind you that back in January, Joe Biden was asked about the potential illegitimacy of the 2022 midterms.
Speaking of voting rights legislation, if this isn't passed, do you still believe the upcoming election will be fairly conducted and its results will be legitimate?
Well, it all depends on whether or not we're able to make the case to the American people that some of this is being set up to try to alter the outcome of the election.
So you heard that, right? Joe Biden, the president of the United States, is casting doubt on the legitimacy of the 2022 midterms.
I just wanted to clarify, a moment ago you were asked whether or not you believed that we would have free and fair elections in 2022 if some of these state legislatures reformed their voting protocols. You said that it depends. Do you think that they would in any way be illegitimate?
Oh yeah, I think it easily can be illegitimate.
That is bonkers. What Biden is clearly saying is that there are state legislatures that have put in place laws that will illegitimately affect the outcome of the 2022 election, unless of course, Congress passes the voting reforms that he wants. Biden and the Democrats are guilty of everything that they accuse the Republicans of. Anyway, the day after Captain Unity's speech, he was asked the following.
Do you consider all Trump supporters to be a threat to the country? No, everyone.
Come on, look, guys. You keep trying to make that case. I don't consider any Trump supporter.
Come on, look, guys. You keep trying to make that case. I don't consider any Trump supporter to be a threat to the country, says the man who gave a half-hour speech making the case that MAGA Republicans are a threat to democracy.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans are a clear and present danger to our democracy. We must be stronger, more determined, and more committed to saving American democracy than MAGA Republicans are to destroying American democracy.
And then on Labor Day, Joe Biden contradicted himself again after dealing with yet another heckler.
We remain in the battle for the soul of America. By the way, all right, God love you. Let him go. We have to be stronger and more determined and more committed to saving American democracy than the MAGA Republicans and that guy Alcantara are destroying democracy.
Just remember, folks, you're not a threat to democracy just as long as you agree with Joe Biden. Everyone else is an enemy of the state. Anyway, that's it for now. Be sure to hit that like button, check out these videos that you may have missed, and be sure that you're still subscribed to the channel. A special thanks to Poofy for her help with this week's script, and as always, I hope to see you next time, if there is a next time.